So this is a best games of 2024. Also, no one plays nearly every game, so I'm sure you have titles I didn't get to. Throw them in the comments. I'll discuss them in the next video or the podcast. Also, remember to drop your game of 2024 in the comments and like the others that agree with you. First up, and probably no surprise, Warhammer Space Marine 2. You know what I didn't expect in 2024? To walk into Warhammer Space Marine 2 and have my brain practically vaporized by just how much fun it was despite any issues. I'm not saying that I didn't like the first one, I loved it, but the universe has always had really two modes, endless screaming violence and the occasional heroic speech just to break things up. And usually that heroic speech is just someone yelling about how faith is a chainsaw. Let's be real for a second. Warhammer does also have a habit of leaning into the whole grimdark war all the time vibe so hard, and for extended periods of time, that grind can be a little less than representative of what can be fun in a game. Also, Games Workshop, through my career, has consistently been at odds with success, having years of terrible games, years of no games, and then years of great ones. Coming upon the bones of the original, which was awesome, Space Marine 2 nailed it. This game did not everything right, but a lot of it. It's like the developers took one look at the idea of too many enemies and decided to crank the dial up so hard it snapped off. Forget World War Z. Space Marine 2 makes that look like a friggin' family barbecue. Instead of zombies, you've got Tyranids, a never-ending avalanche of alien death beetles with more legs and teeth than common sense, and the desire to just rip you open. And it's not just a few here and there, it is waves of them. The game feels less like a shooter at times and more like you're trying to survive inside a blender filled with knives. And somehow also have a bit of strategy there. Tyranids don't politely line up to kill one another either. They handled the swarm mechanics perfectly for a title like this. They skitter and they swarm and they climb and they practically ooze out of the environment like the game itself's just annoyed you're still alive. The DM system that's watching over the top to always make sure engagements are alive and energetic has worked. The distance between you and the objective isn't just always filled with enemies. That distance can be the enemy, depending on your team makeup. While you're marveling at some amazing looking grimdark bit of facility, the smaller bugs are trying to attack you, you're fighting them off up close, and then the big guys show up, swinging bone swords and firing mysterious bio-goo at you. Every block and dodge and chainsword swing is the difference between staying upright or getting pancaked by some nightmare with too many mandibles. As with all Warhammer games, Space Marines aren't just men and women with religious devotion, they are walking tanks. That feel of energy and movement and armor is so thick, it feels like it has its own gravitational pull. Space Marine 2 isn't just about fighting. Somehow, amidst all this gunfire, gore, and occasional existential threat, the game squeezes in a story, and the campaign mode makes you actually feel something, not just adrenaline, but the weight of wars that have come before and the knowledge that, oh yeah, it's probably actually just going to get worse, and it does. It is, in many ways, another shooter. It's a full-blown saga, carving the name of the mysterious Titus across the wastelands. And there's this moment, you know the one, massive alien wrecking ball stomps through the battlefield like it's looking for a snack aisle, and you're just standing there realizing that somehow both you and the other characters in the game feel a little bit like you're completely out of your league. That's the ability of Warhammer, to take the large, the massive, the absolutely mechanical monstrosities of the game and make them feel small against a new enemy or against a new arcane power. The best part, of course, was the co-op, and the game lets you just drop in and out with friends into the carnage, and suddenly the campaign isn't just epic, it's a shared fever dream amongst friends. And then they dropped the new Obelisk update, because clearly 1 billion Tyranids wasn't enough, so now they're dropping Space Marines into spooky tombs during the final events of the campaign to mess around with some ancient tech. When has an ancient tech and messing around with it been an amazing idea? Bottom line though, Space Marine 2 isn't just a contender for my game of the year, it's already halfway to the finish line in many ways. And the feeling of that narrative and the flexibility of it in the campaign, and then the ability to do co-op and all of the other ways, plus what really is a stellar DLC design, works incredibly well for me. If that's not a 2024 highlight, maybe the next game is Elden Ring Shadow of the Erd Tree. Yeah, it's DLC, but we're going to put it on this list anyway. If Shadow of the Erd Tree proves anything, it's that FromSoft isn't just good at making games. They learn from every single title they do make. They reinforce what works, and even in stark change-ups, they somehow relentlessly feel still like FromSoft titles. This expansion isn't just a content drop, it is a sprawling, punishing, awe-inspiring love letter to the original game and to the suffering that we all did when we first played it, the feeling of exploring. And this is one of those titles that, while yes, it is DLC, it's definitely of the size that reminds you of older expansions that we used to get many decades ago, like Shivering Isles. The Realm of the Shadows isn't just big, it's fairly dense. The place feels alive, mysterious, unsettling. I think there's something watching me kind of feeling that always exists in From Software games excels here. And the ability for them to layer that in a multi-tiered environment, twisting and overlapping everything else, begs for you to just wander off the beaten path a little bit more, and then of course regret every life decision you've ever made up until that point. It's got the classic Elden Ring verticality that I think we all loved with that first game. Something I did a walking the walk on if you get a chance to check it out. You look at a crumbling ruin dangling precariously in the sky and you know, hey, you know what? I'm going to get there eventually, so maybe I'll go early. You have hidden paths and shortcuts that consistently save you a little bit, and the landscape is not only just gorgeous, but usually completely hostile to you. Every broken archway, moss-covered statue, and distant silhouette tells a story that you are trying to put together. But it also tells you of places of being ambushed or being killed, and you end up looking at all of these different spots no matter where you are and having little memories, and those become a part of that game. If Shadow of the Erd Tree didn't deliver an unhealthy amount of bosses as well, we'd all be side-eyeing it. Over 40 bosses are hidden. Every encounter in Erdtree feels like they're always asking you to learn a bit or adapt and, of course, suffer a bit. But with a bit of that suffering, you're consistently learning. That dopamine rush you get when you finally land that last hit feels like winning the fist lottery. Somehow FromSoft continues to toe that line between what would be considered unfairly hard and just one more try addicting. 1 second you're cursing their name, and the next you're thinking, you know what? Personally, I like this spot. I like this main enemy, though they've killed me like 45 times. Also, Erdtree offers a significant number of weapons. Shadow of the Erd Tree loves to drop them everywhere. You've got colossal blades, magic relics, you got armor sets so edgy they practically stab you the moment you pick them up. Customization also goes hard here, the same way it did in the original game. If you want to dual wield absurdly large swords, you can do that. The new weapons and abilities aren't just for show. A lot of them shift the way the game feels and the fights that you experience compared to the original title. It isn't dramatically different, but it's enough to make you sit back and realize, I see what they were doing here. It wouldn't be From Software without NPCs who talk in riddles, wander off mid quest, and occasionally die in ways that are 100% your fault. Shadow of the Erd Tree introduces some new faces, some new quest lines, and some different bits of scraps in the lore. Now, I understand that a lot of people don't like how they deliver the lore. I am one of them, but with Erdtree, because it was building on Elden Ring itself, I was fine with it. The interactions also help flesh out the world. They tie some loose ends from the base game into bits that you can at least somewhat untangle. The most interesting part to me about Shadow of the Erd Tree, and something we just don't see that very much anymore, is that it easily could have been its own game. It is massive, it's intricate, it's packed with so much extra content that calling it an expansion almost feels a bit odd. From Software's reputation as the kings of this genre and the creators of it literally fits. Shadow of the Erd Tree is amazing, but I didn't expect some games on the list, and the next one is one of those, and that is, of all things, Unicorn Overlord. If there's a game that'll get me to dust off the ancient machine that never tires known as a Switch, it's going to be a Vanillaware game, or maybe another Raving Rabbids. But seriously, Unicorn Overlord, it's not just a strategy RPG, it's also a Vanillaware flavored fantasy epic. They know how to deliver things. It's like someone decided to get some Fire Emblems, some Ogre Battle, and old school RPGs, and put them all inside of one title right out of the gate. It also does some things that a lot of RPGs don't do, and that's makes you feel like you're actually that character with some tactical prowess right away without making you feel like a complete goddamned idiot at first. There's depth, sure, you've got your formations, class systems, resource jugglings, all the thing that factors into these kind of games, but it's also bottled in Vanillaware's perfect look and that sweet spot of accessibility that they offer. While yes, it is a strategy game, they also have a ton of recruitable characters, and while that overarching, hey, there's a prince, we need to help reclaim his kingdom kind of plot isn't really something that's going to end up holding you too much, it's these other characters, it's exploring, it's finding out more about the world and their stories that genuinely puts it all together. If you played a Vanillaware game before, you know what's coming next, and that's that their art style is all their own. Every single one of their games is like this. It's just always a little bit different. That's the best way to say it about these titles. Each game has their own style. Unicorn Overlord matches and mixes and merges a couple different styles. It's a known entity, but it's also one that will not speak to everybody. I spent a long time trying to figure out if I liked it, I disliked it somewhat or was just confused by their choices. Ultimately, almost everything about Unicorn Overlord feels like it's placed there for a reason. Even some particular character portrait or somehow they end up displaying something makes later sense as you realize it's there for clarity when it comes to combat, or there's something there that's a little bit more basic than you might expect it elsewhere. But the reason why is because you just need to know the basic information. You don't need something flowery in that particular location. If you're a gameplay first kind of person, Unicorn Overlord's tactics and that amazing overlap, all the systems, ton of characters, as well as pretty good sounds and a profound feeling of friggin' strategy, that's all here. Whether you're a Vanillaware fan or just someone looking for a good fantasy adventure, Unicorn Overlord demands your attention, especially if you're okay with what can be considered some antiquated looks and some ancient-ass hardware you're playing it on. This next one sometimes played like it was on ancient-ass hardware, but it is for sure a title I have to mention here, Dragon's Dogma 2. As a sequel to one of the most unique and, in my book, just enjoyable third-person action adventure games, there's a reason why I've done so many videos on this. I was waiting for Dragon's Dogma 2 to either really land like your body when you fall off one of the creatures, or to somehow be much better than the original. I feel like, despite its issues, it is awesome, but it falls somewhere in the middle there. It's an incredible title, but one that is an acquired taste of third-person medieval combat, one-of-a-kind restrictions, climbable enemies, and an almost pure disdain for an enjoyable main quest. While yes, it's an acquired taste, it tasted like pure goddamned adventure to me. You might end up finding that, hey, you're in the middle of nowhere, you're low on lantern oil, and the only thing keeping your company is the unsettling sound of something that's moving just out of sight. That's Dragon's Dogma 2 for you. Atmosphere overlapping with gameplay, a game that doesn't flirt with danger, it takes you out for drinks and leads you into the woods and then whispers, "Good luck, champ," and sends you out with 3 AI followers who are high on bravery and damned low on IQ. And they have a really big best friend complex. Dragon's Dogma 2 is, to me, one of the best, just one more hill kind of experiences. The game is less about wandering through a fantasy land and more about starring as you in your own personal adventure. And that main character syndrome, it may rub some people the wrong way, especially as the game's narrative feels like it was written to be as bland as humanly possible, while still giving you the barest of reasons to explore. But for pure gameplay mixed with atmosphere, there's very few games that stuck with me like Dragon's Dogma 2, and has continued to. It doesn't just do atmosphere, it seems to wield it like one of the weapons, and you better believe it doesn't check to see if you're ready for whenever it strikes. For example, when night falls, the entire game shifts from, hey, this is a fun fantasy romp, to who gave the environment PTSD and why does it hate me? Every sound feels almost louder, every shadow feels thicker, and suddenly you're praying that whatever is making those noise stays just over the next hill because you don't have enough healing, or one of your AI has wandered off to attack a different creature. During the day, you face off against all kinds of different animals, different enemies, different magical things, including griffins who have an inordinate hate for wagons, smashing them just as you're getting in, or even if you are inside. It feels consistently chaotic, and I love that. Regardless of the game's excellent class system, which offers a series of quick use skills between them, and a nice, robust, if somewhat lean weapon and armory system, it all feels like it's consistently edging you to experiment in some way. And also the fact that the pawns can be hired and fired, equipped, and bedazzled by all of the things you collect, but they're also friends. And unlike a lot of other games where you have NPC characters with you, there's something that makes the pawns feel almost like a pseudo-online kind of feel to it. I think we all played games with randoms before where you wonder to yourself, dude, where is this guy's head at? You feel that way with the AI, but because they are dog-like in their love for you, it pays off. Casting massive ice spells to wielding illusions to confuse enemies to walk into ravines. There's a bit of everything in this game, including the same ability to grab onto enemies and climb up and use them as a tree to get to the top and perform a weak spot attack, or just unload them with a power attack while you're up there trying to balance on a giant's shoulders as it's teetering around the level. And I get it, some people may not like this one as much as the first one, but I do. I love having the pawns who are like over-enthusiastic golden retrievers with swords. They'll spot loot from 300 miles away, they'll scream about it, and it's like they just won the lottery. They're healing you, then the next, they're hurtling themselves at some griffin that you were trying to hope to avoid. It's equal spots hilarious and stressful, and again, feels a little bit like you're playing with randoms. I don't always like every single game or game part to be balanced. I don't need that in all my games. Dragon's Dogma says, all right, KARAK, that's the way you want it? Well, that's the way you're going to get it. But no matter what, you're always learning something. You're always finding a bit of armor, a new ability, a new kind of weapon. And when you do get those new abilities, you're always trying them out on different enemies. Just as you stumble into a hidden cave, you accidentally aggro a dragon when you walk out of it. And then you find yourself the victim of harpies, killing everybody or putting them to sleep like kids conked out in front of a TV during the best part of a late night movie watch. Dragon's Dogma 2 isn't perfect. What is there is almost alive and unpredictable and more fun than I believe it had any right to be. It's a game where failure is a part of the story and the best moments come from the absolute disasters that you somehow survive from. That's the kind of game that I do like. Is it the best game of 2024? Honestly, no. Dragon's Dogma 2, though, does deserve to be on my list. It is one of the top, most enjoyable 2024 games. Another game that's top, but maybe not as enjoyable when it comes to pure gameplay, but is completely 100% understanding of its focus, and that's Final Fantasy Rebirth. Final Fantasy Rebirth was way better than I expected, just full stop. This is a game that's a reboot, remake, re-rendering of one title turned into three, and that seemed like an odd situation regardless of who was making it and what game they were going to make. There's something profound about stepping into Final Fantasy Rebirth and seeing that world stretch out in front of you in full 3D for the first time, especially if you're an original fan. It's a kind of moment that makes you pause, really pause, just to sort of sit back and soak in the world around you. And just as you're gawking, some story reminder will come up and say, hey, Mana's being sucked straight out of the planet and Cloud's crew is here to stop it. And you go off in your turn-based, multiple character RPG. It's that consistent tug of war, though, between wonder and impending doom that's delivered in the story that gives Rebirth a bit of weight. One second you're standing in awe at the world's beauty, the next you're watching spells erupt across a battlefield like magical fireworks shows that threaten to tear the very fabric of reality apart, and that's just when one of your characters randomly decides to fight three dudes who ended up thinking that they could take you. Final Fantasy might not have the biggest spell roster in RPG history. It's more like a condo brochure, but that thing goes hard. Even the smallest spells in Rebirth feel like goddamn celestial events, filling entire areas with swirling arcs of crystalline energy or shattering the ground with explosions that look like they could rupture time and space. And honestly, I'm here for that. Final Fantasy's always walked that line between epic and weird, and Rebirth leans really hard into both. But the beauty of it is that it's not drowning in random open world fluff. Yes, there are events, but they're not constantly bombarding you like side quest confetti at some kind of carnival. Even when the game does open up, it never feels as overwhelming as it probably could, especially in today's day and age of making games. Sure, the game doesn't necessarily stay super tight when it comes to its pacing, but it lets you experience most of the world without that creeping sense of, oh no, I'm missing like 30 hidden tasks. And that's more surprising to me, or it was, because they knew that they had this overworld from the original game that they wanted to expand on, and it really could have gone horribly wrong, but instead it's fairly stratified. It contains that overworld, it's focused, but it's pretty ambitious, it's sprawling when it needs to be. It also doesn't overextend, at least to me, most of its welcome. It's got chocobo riding, you got your party makeup, a shit ton of upgrades, and in almost every way, it outdoes the first title. And I have no problems putting this one on my list. If you made it this far, did you expect any of these or none of them? Here's one that I haven't talked about that much, so you probably don't expect it. I know I didn't, and that is Kill Knight. Kill Knight just comes in and says, you know what, sometimes the name can be simple and still offer one of the best experiences in recent memory. Regardless, Kill Knight just walks in, its blood-drenched sword in hand, and lets the name do the talking. Is it subtle? No, it is not. But when you're carving through waves of enemies in a symphony of pixelated carnage, subtlety isn't exactly something that you're going to worry about. This is a game where painting the outside with the insides of the enemies is the first moment, and then someone steps in and says, we still got the rest of the game to deliver, and it goes up from there. The moment I booted this up, Kill Knight made one thing very clear. This wasn't like a love letter to the arcade classics of the past. It's a full-throttle delivery of the arcades of the past in current form with a ton of new feel to it. It's blisteringly fast, one of the faster games that I played this year, and it offers up this consistent drive to be just a little bit different. A Dead Knight resurrected for reasons, sure, that's your story. But it also means it's one of those titles that almost never has any downtime, that the bosses can be nut crunching at first, and with each swing or shot or strike carries a great feel of weight to it that lets you know something around the corner can be annihilated, but at the same time 10 other guys will be annihilating you, and you need to understand the difference between blindly spamming attacks and understanding spacing, movement, and what you can end up hitting, practically daring you the entire time to understand its dance. You're not just juggling enemies, you're orchestrating all these moves with range shots. You're threading the needle between offense and survival at every moment. In a lot of ways, it reminded me of an isometric Returnal. And sure, when you look at it, Kill Knight doesn't have a normal style skill and ability subsection where you're staring at a constellation of stars like Path of Exile 2 style of gameplay or anything along those lines. The number of weapons and how to use them, I think, makes up for it. It's not necessarily wide. It's just sort of in the middle ground. It also looks absolutely wicked, like if the Underworld threw one hell of a party and the one guy there was hopped up on hate and murder skills and somehow it works. It's sparse for the most part, but it's very visually striking, and environmentally, I really found it to be pretty informative, something that you do need, especially when you're up to your neck in 30 enemies and 300 bullets, and a line of fire is twisting around behind you, and you have to figure out exactly that little tiny bit of space that you're able to move to or from. There's no real fluff here, no overbearing exposition. As I said, you're just a knight resurrected, and you got to go kill somebody. Nothing really elaborate or crazy. It doesn't need to justify its purpose overall with the story. In fact, it feels a little bit like a Michael Bay story in his storytelling technique. It's just opening, climax, 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 and then, oh yeah, you know what? Another climax. As I was playing it always just had that one more time kind of feel to it. I wasn't impressed with this when I first played it. It took me a couple times, but once I started diving in, there's something almost just ruthless about it. And Kill Knight nails the balance of understanding movement, progression, range, the hit boxes that enemies have. Every single thing about it requires just a little bit of focus from you, and that focus starts to burn out a little bit of your energy as you keep playing it. I love that kind of game where I feel like every single thing I need to do doesn't let me really rest on any kind of zen-like moment. It almost never has one of those moments. It consistently is requiring that focus from you. But to me, that's what I wanted in a game like this, and I got it. In a year packed with heavy hitters like this, I think Kill Knight stands by not trying to be anything more than really what it is, and that's a relentless, complete gauntlet of adrenaline, grit, grime, guts, and mayhem. And if you got the reflexes or the patience, or if you got a little bit of a hate yourself streak, this is probably a title for you. I think it's well worth being on the list, even though not a lot of people talk about it. Here's one game that a lot of people talk about. I'm wondering if you guys know what this one is. Take a guess, put it in the comments. It's going to be, of course, Black Myth Wukong. Now, if any game came down to just pure fun factor for me in 2024, it is actually Black Myth. Hands down, the most pure fun I probably had, maybe other than Dragon's Dogma. The enjoyment I felt at just deconsecrating another holy location by bloodbathing a weird dancy cat boss pulled directly from Kung Fu Panda was not matched. I never expected a martial arts spin-kicking game with a monkey protagonist who only used staves to entice me this much, but it did, despite the difficulty, despite the issues, and despite that really, in many ways, it does feel a lot like a Dark Souls-style title. But it's one restricted to you roughly having one main weapon type, which I did not think I would like, and instead I found it to actually have an extra feel of focus to it that I enjoyed. No matter what I was doing through this game, from start to finish, whether it be that chaos, the magic, the myth, fighting a new enemy, hearing a new little bit about the story, every single time I jump back into it, I was like, you know what, man, I missed you. From the moment you end up stepping into some questionable location, the game makes it abundantly clear this isn't about following the exact trends of other games in the genre, and I like that. It's about smashing through enemies that are low level and learning how to do it. It's about realizing that you don't really need to worry about corpse runs, and then fighting off some kind of fiery bear that channels Randy Macho Man Savage's spirit from the grave, and that's the first hour or two. Now, at its core, Black Myth borrows familiar tools from a lot of the different genres' well-worn toolbox. You have timing, precision, the eternal cycle of getting your ass kicked until you figure out all the patterns, but it also removes some of those. It wraps some of those mechanics in something that's pretty much its own, a weird march through folklore that's strange to a lot of Westerners and beautiful if you like to learn new stuff. It's kind of a thing that I really like to experience, sit back, and then play, and then go back and replay some of the locations to learn some of the patterns. And that's really honestly rare for me. I don't usually end up doing that in any of the Dark Souls style games, but there's something also about the locations. They're winding. You go through forgotten ruins suspended in the sky. You have hidden paths curling around weird structures as if the world itself is daring you to push a little bit further, and maybe you're just going to get confused about where you are. It's going one more tunnel down to see if there's a secret and if there's a giant boss down there that not only has their own bit of a story, but also unlocks a new location if you find a secret in their arena when fighting it. Some levels feel like they're being folded on themselves, filled with doors that don't open until you fought something twice your size. There's shortcuts that reveal themselves not inherently through anything you would really expect, but really as shortcuts and secrets. And that can actually infuriate some people. But for me, it was just something that I consistently engage with. It was exploration that isn't just encouraged, it's sort of expected. It pulls you a little deeper each time. And as you go through that, you're consistently finding relics and scrolls and weird riddles. You're unlocking new weapons or armor types or spells that are useful. And that usefulness spreads across all those, and it's just a tiny bit different. In many ways, it reminds me a little bit of like Bloodborne, where it forces a bit of offensiveness from you. And it, in some ways, reminds me a little bit of Sekiro, where there's forced particular styles, or unless you want to just bang your head against a wall, there's some things it expects from you. Black Myth thrives on pretty smart surgical strikes, where the difference between a flawless win and getting punted off a cliff by a frog wearing too much eyeliner is just one mistimed dodge. But at the same time, there's experimentation that can happen in the smallest of moments. And yes, sometimes small matters, because here, even the smaller enemies are pretty dangerous, but not in the same danger way that you might feel from a Dark Souls game, because you don't have those corpse runs. You can run into a boss fully expecting to find some monument of destruction, only to get absolutely folded up by something that looks like it escaped from a Studio Ghibli film. Especially because depending on what you've gathered, depending on the skills that you picked up, sometimes the boss isn't the hard guy. It's trying to figure out how to get there, or trying to figure out how to move between the enemies to get there with a certain amount of resources. There's some absurd encounters here that I adore, because, as I said before in some of the other games, I don't need everything to be perfectly balanced. Sometimes it's the exploration where I end up getting that juice. Now, I mean that, except for the fucking archers. We all know what I'm talking about, but those archers, man, they were rough. Unpredictability carries a lot for me, and that is something you see not only in the exploration here, but also the boss battles. They never really feel unfair. Every boss feels a little like a lesson you probably could have avoided, or it's identifying a skill that you probably have. While there were some surprises and some bosses that I did feel were pretty difficult, there is an overarching sense of exploration here that is unmatched, at least to me, by any other game other than perhaps Elden Ring. And for that, I gotta give my hats off to him, because damn. There just are few games where, through all the punishment, all the late night boss fights, and that friggin' Kung Fu Tiger blade guy in the blood pool, the moments where I genuinely did not consider throwing the controller across the room were the best ones. Because no matter what I did, I just never felt angry in this game or frustrated beyond the point of no return. This isn't just one of the better games of 2024 to me. For sure, it's up there when it comes to pure fun, and for that reason, it's definitely on my list. Another one that's on my list, but probably more of a surprise, at least for me, but maybe not for the gaming world as a whole, and that's Balatro. If Balatro is anything, it's everything. Shaken, stirred, and dumped on the poker table like a dealer just stopped caring and started throwing random shit into the mix. Or at least it looks like that at first. It actually reminds me of trying to play poker with a 5-year-old who just keeps making up rules for the cards because the picture on the face card looks wicked. This card's a queen. She has a broken heart because she was a kid and a prince was killed when he was clubbed like a seal by the king of clubs. It's that kind of shit. Seriously, 2024 gave us a lot of surprises, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the absolute grip this random indie game not only had on me, but everybody else. It's a bit like Slay the Spire and Texas Hold'em had a baby, and that baby learned how to count cards at the age of 3 and hustle everybody. At its basic core, Balatro takes flushes, straights, full houses, and mutates all of those poker hands into something that is way more unpredictable, like poker binge-watched Inception and thought, you know what, I could top that. You're building all these hands to earn chips, you survive escalating blinds, and beat increasingly difficult rounds. If you lose a round, you go back. This is poker laced with just enough chaos to make you question if you're actually playing cards or accidentally summoning weird creatures from a shadow realm. And one of the major things are the jokers. They are game changers. They boost specific hands, they change chips, they warp reality 1 second to the next. 1 minute you have all these kind of really good cards, and the next you end up getting double the points for those. One joker might make flushes worth double, another might make it so that triplets do something else. You can even get other types of cards, as well as just sort of understanding the basic poker principles is something you should do when you're playing it. And that's really the magic here. You think it's a poker game, but it really is all kinds of other games built over the top of that. So if you understand poker, you'll understand some of the basics. But if you don't and you play other card games, you're still going to understand some of the basics. Feels distinctly different in many ways like Black Myth Wukong does, as I talked about before. And no matter what, I felt like this is one of those games that does scream for one more hand, one more attempt, one more check, one more ante, one more looking at how the different systems work together. There's a lot of collectible elements to it that I like. Honestly, Balatro is just fantastic. If you ended up losing a match or two to a surprise joker, hit the like button. We've all been there. Next up, and another game I'm absolutely cool with, that is Pacific Drive. Pacific Drive is one of the most profoundly surprising games of 2024. At its core, it's a roguelike driver, but at its heart, it's a series of these odd, unforgivable road trip horror stories all stitched together by the duct tape and prayers and faint hum of something paranormal in your engine you hear throughout of it. It's like flipping through the best chapters of a novel you can't put down, except in this case, that book continually tries to kill you. That's what I like about it. If Pacific Drive teaches you one thing, it's that a car with no doors, 2 flat tires, and a hood that flew off 3 miles ago can still probably get you home. Just barely, though. The game revolves around one core principle: survive the drive, as well as run around and scavenge shit. Your car isn't just that. It's a timeline. It's a lifeline even. It's a storage locker. It's a mobile workshop, and occasionally your haunted companion. Before each trip, you load up supplies, gear, and a faint sense of optimism in the idea that you might live through the next trip, and then you drive out. You plot a route that hopefully won't kill you, and you try to find more salvage. Things never go smoothly in this game. 1 second you're casually ripping panels off abandoned cars, you're scavenging parts like some post-apocalyptic treasure hunter, and the very next you're flooring it down some muddy back road as anomalies bend reality around you, and mysterious entities make it very clear they do not want you to leave, which is weird because originally they don't want you to be there. Every single drive starts out simply enough: get in, drive, and don't die. But by the very end, the exact opposite extremes of that are there. Because the moment you decide to head back, like I said, the game ends up hating you. The world warps and throws a tantrum and tries to do everything it can to destroy your ability to escape. But if you do escape, if you do get back, or maybe it's your first time, you get to spend your time in the garage, which is your home hideout and do-it-yourself laboratory. Every piece of salvage that you bring back ends up mattering a great deal. You're consistently tinkering. You're slapping on new upgrades to the car. You're patching holes and hoping you can squeeze just one little bit more life out of this beaten-up jalopy that somehow hasn't exploded yet. You can bolt on different gear that makes your station wagon look like it's auditioning for Mad Max, or you can just keep it somewhat normal. But no matter what, it's this amazing synergy between a salvage/survival game and a horror/Ghostbusters game. Also, the thing about Pacific Drive is, of course, it's not about hyper-realism. You can see that in the footage, but it's about a vibe, and heavy on the vibe. What if liminal spaces had cars? The roads stretch out in weird patterns, anomalies distort the landscape, and everything has this very eerie, dreamlike glow to it. You'll find abandoned gas stations, weird signs left behind by someone, and everything that furthers the mystery just a bit more as you explore. It's one of the few games I've played in a long time where, as I was learning little bits more bits of mystery were added to it. And it's in many ways a driving game, which just feels really weird, but it's a weird that works. No matter what, you start to care for this car. It's not perfect, and at times you swear it's got a mind of its own that wants to probably kill you, but somehow it just all clicks when the world tilts sideways, everything's falling apart, and you find yourself gripping the wheel, begging the damn thing to just hold on a bit longer, doing a drift around some muddy edge, and driving towards the escape. That game feels fantastic. Also, as someone from the Pacific Northwest, where roads in the backcountry usually just mean 2 long mud puddles met somewhere in the middle, I can confirm Pacific Drive nails the feeling of skidding through mud and regretting every single tire choice you ever made. The driving isn't supposed to be clean, and it's not supposed to make you a little bit like you feel like you're wrestling a wild animal with really bad tempers, but it fits and it works. To me, Pacific Drive got me back into what I would say is loosely survival gameplay, because punching one more tree was going to fracture my sanity, but somehow sawing off the sides of a car didn't bother me. I can't explain it, but what I can say is Pacific Drive is one hell of a ride. Speaking about a ride, subscribers get to vote on which of these games will break down farther, either in video or in the podcast. Put a vote in for which one you want me to dive into even more, especially because some of these I didn't get a chance to review. One game I did get a chance to review, though, and I gotta speak on this one, is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. If you've ever wanted to sprint headfirst into ancient tombs, accidentally destroy priceless artifacts, and knock fascists off cliffs with the sheer power of a right hook that sounds like a shotgun going off, Indiana Jones the Great Circle is probably for you. Or you could say it was your holy grail. And as mostly a first-person action-adventure game, it's goddamned good. Even if the character's name was Smedley the bartender, this would still be good. It's a game that surprisingly doesn't really rest on just being an Indiana Jones game, but instead just a first-person adventure game that doesn't get lost in huge open worlds or various life systems. What it does is it has a series of progressively massive maps built around hub areas that practically beg you to just explore a little bit, loot, and accidentally step on booby traps. The game starts off easy enough with a nicely guided sort of tour at Marshall College, which is a tutorial. Then it drops you into Vatican City. And I got to tell you guys, even more than I expected, Vatican City is a massive first area. One minute you're admiring architecture, the next you're juking priests, you're dodging soldiers, and somehow find ways to get creative on how to reach your objectives or using the disguises system. Sneaky alternative routes are here. The disguises, as I said, were here, and also the ability to just absolutely body check some of these guys with some serious hits if you just want to knock them out and hide their bodies. It nails that vibe. Combat is not just button mashings, but I will tell you it is pretty loose. It's very visceral. Punching somebody in this game feels a lot like you're really putting your back into it, maybe a little bit too much, or if you're trying to knock somebody's head completely loose so that the last 3 generations of their kid's dental work flies out. But offsetting that is some of the best puzzle work I've seen in a game. It works so well, it's sort of shocking. There isn't a lot of filler content. There's giant ancient boxes, you got cryptic puzzles, and like I said, some traps. It's always Indiana Jones. It feels like something directly from the movies. Also, apparently Indiana Jones was that star kid in high school who could climb to the top of the gym 300 times on the rope without getting tired, which is really useful in this game with this much platforming. You also get to decide just how deep you want to dive. Yes, you can sprint past like half of the content, but if you don't want to, there's really maps on maps on maps. There's all kinds of stuff for you to explore. And by few, I actually mean an overwhelming mountain of different things for you to find in this. It is great. Even the books that you get, you have to read to understand and get skills from. There's something about this game that, despite it having some issues, especially at launch, they've been patched out. And for the most part, this is something that I would swear to God, it feels like Lucasfilm needs to steal the idea from it and put it in a movie. It's honestly at times that good. Great Circle isn't necessarily a game by Machine Games getting Indiana Jones. It's that it really actually feels like it is Indiana Jones. You have a lot of exploration, a lot of combat. You have first-person platforming, which doesn't always feel the same. But every single environment is a place I found myself exploring, understanding, wanting to figure out, grabbing a disguise from, and then pounding the shit out of a bunch of bad guys in. And I really never once felt like, oh, they missed the mark hugely, especially after that big patch. Speaking of big, let's talk about something massive, and that's my desire to have you subscribe. But seriously, next up, and it is a massive game, is Metaphor ReFantazio. If you thought Atlas was just gonna sort of keep cranking out Persona games until the end of time, well, they didn't. It's basically Atlas throwing a lot of their textbooks out the window, grabbing a sword and diving headfirst into a weird politically charged medieval fantasy game, but not forgetting what paid for its giant castle made of Persona cash in the first place. It's a mix of party-based combat, unique battle systems, some pretty deep storytelling, and a lot of weirdness. Forget the demonic high school drama. This one's got kingdoms, it's got curses, it's got a metric ton of weird, odd social commentary that somehow comes together. It just works, and it's, for me, a story in particular that works better than I think the Persona games at times did for me. Maybe that's just because it's a change-up. I don't know. Nevertheless, the game dumps you straight into a kingdom that's stepped right out of a medieval tapestry, but's decided to spice things up with a lot of social unrest and occasional curses. You play as a character that goes out to save a prince, break a curse, and that's pretty much it. But somehow you get roped into fixing centuries of systemic inequality. Don't ask me exactly how they figured out that that would be a good idea, but they did, and weirdly enough, it works. It's got classic RPG vibes, but it's got that Atlas weirdness of weaving real-world issues into the tapestry like it's a limited edition fashion line. Atlas took the whole fantasy world concept, layered it with a lot of political intrigue so that it resembles something closer to, at times, Game of Thrones. But where Atlas kept to their strengths is the archetype system that's going to feel somewhat familiar, though oddly different, because this is a completely different game. It's like a class customization system on steroids. If you want to play warrior mages, you can do that. If you want to play stealthy rogues, you can do that. But you can also mix a bunch of things together and experiment with the characters that you get. It's really about mixing and matching the job classes to create builds that are weirdly ridiculous and probably shouldn't work, but end up most of the time doing so. Every fight also feels like a weird playground where you can adjust and try out your new combos. You can break the meta and remind enemies that you're the good guy. I will say this though, that beginning area, not too pretty. But when compared to the overall game, which is massive, it's not really something that hits against it. Somehow they kept this game going for like well over 100 hours too. Apparently, we're not the only ones obsessed with this game because Metaphor crushed it on launch day. They had 1 million plus sales immediately. That's not a flex. I don't know what is. That is ridiculous. Critics seem to have loved it. Players couldn't stop talking about it. I've finally got to really visit it and I adore it. Metaphor is a unique title, but one that I think people will be talking about for a long time. And it certainly adds to the stable of Atlas games and something else that they can pick and choose from to make another one. Speaking of making another one, this company's done that time and time again and somehow pulled it out every friggin' time. And that's Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Listen, yes, it's a Yakuza game, sure, but it's, as always, chaotic, it's heartfelt, it's got an odyssey wrapped in jorts and occasionally carrying a traffic cone as a weapon. Every Yakuza game before it has been a full-blown cinematic roller coaster, and here we are again. You got your laughs, your tears, your absolute madness. It's also packed to the brim with all kinds of weird moments that made me question how gaming can be this unhinged, yet still, at times, emotionally profound. That means also, though, because it's a Yakuza game, and in this vein, it's a third-person turn-based fighting RPG. It's got tons of class systems, it's got mini-games, and also crazy characters and things that you can do. I mean, there's an entire island resort simulator tucked into the middle of the game, and the only way to get off of it is by riding a frigging dolphin. If that's not a metaphor for everything Ichiban stands for, that entirely innocent, always optimist, charging headfirst into situations, dumbass character that you have, I don't know what is. Somehow, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth juggles the absurdity of these characters and sincerity mixed in. It's got little bits of extra spices to a recipe of disaster that every Yakuza game ultimately descends into, but weirdly enough, Infinite Wealth almost hits it better. It crafts a story that if you sit all the way through it is deeply personal. It lets you chuck enemies into oncoming traffic as well. You got a sob session, then you have Ichiban's relentless positivity as he bounces from one part of the game to the other. You have all these characters that have intertwined paths that form the backbone of a narrative that hits very hard on unique and, I would say, many times serious themes. And just when you think the game is about to let up, it sucker punches you with some emotional twist that has you feeling actually about the characters like you care. This isn't a melodrama. It's a Yakuza game at heart, and that means you do have a lot of combat that feels like someone said, what if a turn-based RPG had more bicycles to the face? The shift from brawling to tactical turn-based system feels sharper this time as well than it did the prior games. Every fight feels like a very nice mixture of RPG strategy and a kind of wild boar fight. I also don't know how they did this, and I didn't know if this would work, but it did. And that's Hawaii as a location turned out to be one of the best parts of the game. Switching it up and offering new locations, people, products, and punching bags, it feels like no matter which way you turn, something ridiculous is waiting to drag you off, and it's new. 1 minute you're managing a weird beachfront resort, the next you're deep diving into some kind of side quest that involves wild creatures, and you have absolutely no business trying to join and do those things, but you're able to because of that Ichiban character and his consistent desire to just say, yeah, I'll give her a try. Every time I thought I was making some kind of story progress, karaoke or another weird minigame popped up and stole another 2 to 5 hours of my life. And I was actually grateful for that, because those distractions, they're actually not filler here. They end up making the entire world feel a tiny bit more alive, even though a lot of them are weirdly comedic in nature. For all the laughs and the weird moments, though, I will say, again, it's got some surprising weight. That optimism that Ichiban feels isn't just something that we can laugh about. It actually ends up meaning that the more ludicrous situations feel like the funny ones, and even slightly serious ones feel more weighty. It's a very good play on storytelling, and it's something that a lot of games would not be able to hit at all. It's hard to overstate just how much game there is here, whether it be the story or the actual gameplay moments. The content at times can feel overwhelming. Even after you finish the main story, you can explore around and do all kinds of crazy stuff. Like a Dragon also doesn't stand as one of the best games of 2024. I think it actually solidifies itself as one of the best Yakuza games. With that one out of the way, this one's going to be a bit more contentious, but as someone who had the pleasure to sit down and play this game without most people knowing about it until reviews came out, it's going to be on my list, plain and simple, and that is friggin' Astro Bot. Look, okay, Astro Bot isn't here to really revolutionize gaming or blow your mind with some groundbreaking new concept. It's here to delight you, plain and simple. This is a game that's like getting wrapped in a warm, fuzzy nostalgia blanket, except that blanket is hyper-saturated candy-colored playgrounds full of weird, adorable robots that somehow manage to throw the best party in town without even trying. There's something effortless about this game. It mixes all kinds of game mechanics from various different titles. It is a platformer at heart, but it is also very tight, very clean in its design for the locations, even the crazier ones that remind you at times a little bit of Nintendo titles. One minute you're in New York City, the next you're dodging pastel, and with a graphical flair that matches no matter what. I would say in many ways it can feel a little bit like Nintendo titles in how they do things, a little bit more basic. But then you have, as I would say, Sony's signature flair. You have all kinds of different bits to it, parts where everything mixes together. One minute you're in New York City, the next you're in a desert, and then bam, you're in a forest helping a sick giant plant pollinate. And that's all before the plant starts rapping. Yes, you heard that right. And somehow that's just all normal. You're on a mission to save the other little bots, and every inch of the game feels like a carnival where the rides are powered by pure joy and questionable sciences. Each world is also one that feels unique in and of itself. Every single one of them feels what I would say a little bit to be like a Little Big Planet level in a way. There's no real epic twist here, no aha mechanic either. Astro Bot is at its core very platforming centric. If you like platforming, this one's going to be right up your alley, and it reminds me of titles like Psychonauts 2, which is a modern classic to me that doesn't care about appealing to everybody. Astro Bot doesn't either, though I would say its difficulty, which is definitely lower than normal, feels like it may be aiming at that. Also, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the graveyard of Sony IPs that Astro Bot lovingly parades around, because as you go around jumping and swinging and trying to figure out different parts of the levels, you're also meeting other Sony mascots from forgotten games, like a family album. It might feel a little sad, like wandering through a cemetery of beloved franchises gone too soon, but instead of mournful, weird silence, the bots are having a pool party in your controller when you save them. And yes, that touchpad is a hot tub. So to me, there was really nothing sad about this. We all treat death and the missing differently. Some mourn it and some celebrate it. To me, Astro Bot is solidly the latter. It's celebrating that all those exist, not sitting there and wondering why 1,001 titles haven't been remade, which is also a complaint that everybody seems to friggin' have. I swear to God, sometimes it feels like you absolutely cannot win. It is weird, it's wonderful, it works insanely well, it looks gorgeous. Astro Bot is awesome. It doesn't care about gritty realism, there's no complex narrative or redefining the platforming genre. Instead, it takes all of the things from platforming and makes different levels sort of sing by using them. What it does care about also is just sort of making you smile. If you're looking for a game that feels like a love letter to everything fun about gaming, and in particular platforming, Astro Bot is waiting for you. Boxing, turtle gloves, and all. Now that's about a game that doesn't change much and tries to deliver the best parts of the genre you expect. Here's one that tries to turn a lot of shit on its head, and that's Manor Lords. It is at its core a city builder. It's also some kind of weird 14th century fever dream where you go to play medieval Sim City with a splash of Total War in it. It's the kind of game that really ends up dropping you in the middle of a muddy field, hands you a hammer and says, build something grand or starve trying. And let me tell you, I've never been happier to herd virtual peasants in my life or to be surprised by a single game's almost relentless vision to change things up. Not because they were broken, but in the developer's eyes, they didn't reflect his own desires for a game in the genre. So he decided, hell, I'll make one. You start small in this one, like embarrassingly small. You got a few shacks, a dirt road, a handful of villagers that probably questionably ill in weird ways. And that's the charm. Manor Lords lets you watch that humble hamlet morph into something that is worthy of you actually caring about as you later go on. Every building you put down, every plot of land ends up feeling earned and changes things up a bit. Here, the roads can curve depending on how you put them down, where all the buildings sort of slip together and they feel like they're huddling together for warmth. Every place you put something, the landscape adjusts sort of your result. And that means that the town feels very organic. In your city, buildings go up along winding paths, or your town feels less like a planner's dream and more like an actual historical reenactment. And if you want to run around in first-person mode, you can do that, taking a nice look at the people starving in your village because you forgot to set up a supply line right. The game also does an excellent job displaying that. You have amazing environments. You got random peasants carrying sacks of grain because even that can actually look pretty good. You got torches. You have different lighting systems. You also have characters chatting at the market or hauling wood to some half-finished project like they're auditioning for a medieval productivity app. And no matter what you're doing, the actual world changes depending on the weather. So, for example, frost-covered fields or smoldering chimneys in winter. As you build this stuff, you realize what the core loop is overall of Manor Lords. You don't just stockpile the materials like some kind of loot king. You have to balance production. You have to ensure goods flow properly and consistently adjust to seasonal shifts and the growing needs of your settlement. You have to handle soil fertility. You have to handle deforestation. It's not enough to just sort of mindlessly expand and collect. Expanding too fast can actually mean shortages. Here, expanding too slow can also mean starving through the winter. You have to trade to get different items, and distribution matters. Every decision affects the survival of your people, and that also does mean the building originally that you did and how you set it up can end up being an inefficiency. I love that. Also, just because at some point you're going to think, oh, you know what, this is pretty simple. You sit back, you build some buildings. Manor Lord also has real-time battles. This feels a little bit like Total War's distant cousin that's questionable when it comes to some of the stuff he says. It's not about building a thriving town to protect. It's about having characters in the town going out to combat when they need to. Because here you have to understand that for every fighting man in the field plowing bad guys through the dirt with hammers and swords, that dude isn't home plowing his field making food or plowing his wife making babies. And that means fielding an army that can take a distinctly different look depending on the location, the time of the year, the fruitfulness of all your endeavors, what you have to equip them, and more. Also, here's the thing. Manor Lords is not finished. This is an early access title. The developer has his own plans for how things are going to go, and there's a good tree of expanding ideas of what he wants to do. But even through that, and even through the fact that, honestly, the combat is the weak point here, there's a satisfaction of watching a village bloom into something that looks a little bit like a kingdom and having some diplomacy options to take advantage of that. This is a testament, I think, to how different developers can identify a particular genre and deliver totally fantastically different feels in their games. I cannot wait to see where Manor Lords goes next. And next up for me is some honorable mentions. First, UFO 50. That game looks phenomenal. I haven't got a chance to play this one, but few titles seem to garner across the board reviews like that, so I feel pretty comfortable saying that's an honorable mention. Also, Plucky Squire. I love the game. It's a fairy tale come to life. It's got 2D and 3D worlds mixed together. It's like a kid's Toy Story built to remind you of younger times, better times, and enjoyable years. Fantastic game, but it's a slightly different style one, and in many ways it reminds me a little bit of Astro Bot, but those two games, absolutely honorable mentions. Do you agree, disagree? Post in the comments. Make sure to post your own lists. I always remember to read those things. Also, you should remember, not everyone played the same games you did, so if your favorite isn't on here, maybe I didn't play it, and I didn't like it, or didn't have room to do a top 100 games list. That's it for me. Peace out. If you didn't subscribe, hey, you know what? You're a bad person, or at the very least, you might miss out on some amazing exclusive coverage we have coming later this year. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.